He came into my world with the kind of confidence that could convince even the most skeptical soul. His smile was easy, practiced, designed to put me at ease, and his voice carried the weight of promises he never intended to keep. At first, I thought I had found someone trustworthy, someone who understood me in ways that others never did. He studied people the way a hunter studies prey, noting weaknesses, fears, and quiet desires. He knew what to say, when to listen, and when to make silence feel like intimacy. For a while, I was caught in that spell, believing I had found a rare bond. But behind the mask was a man who thrived on deception. His charm was his weapon, and his lies were his armor. Piece by piece, he began dismantling the stability of my life. He manipulated my friendships, sowing doubts where there had been none. He played with my work, twisting circumstances to make me look unreliable, all the while pretending to be my anchor. I didn't notice the subtle shifts at first, the way people looked at me differently, the whispers I couldn't trace, the sudden cracks in the foundation of what I thought was unshakable. He wanted more than just trust. He wanted control. And to have it, he aimed to break me down completely. I realized too late that everything about him was calculated. Every gesture of kindness hid a blade. Every word of comfort was a setup for betrayal. By the time I uncovered the truth, he had taken far too much, my confidence, my peace, and nearly my sense of self. Yet what he didn't understand was that destruction, once set in motion, doesn't always go in the direction the destroyer intends. His need for power blinded him. He grew reckless, arrogant, believing himself untouchable. He tried to trap me in situations that would leave me ruined in the eyes of others, but in his desperation to tighten the noose, he overlooked the fact that he had left a trail. Lies, after all, can only stretch so far before they unravel. The moment came quietly, not with the thunder of confrontation, but with the cold precision of truth surfacing. Those he thought he had fooled began to see through him. His contradictions piled up, his false stories crumbled, and the same confidence that once enchanted others began to look like arrogance. The walls he had built around his schemes collapsed inward. People he had manipulated turned against him, and the networks of deceit he wove strangled him instead of me. I stood on the sidelines, weary but unbroken, watching as the chaos he had created consumed him. The man who tried to break my life ended up breaking his own. His reputation was shredded, his alliances dissolved, and his name became a warning rather than a weapon. In the end, he lost everything he had stolen, and everything he had pretended to be. What was left of him was only the truth he could never escape, that no cheat, no matter how skilled, can ever outsmart the consequences of their own lies. He had always moved like a shadow through people's lives, slipping in unnoticed at first, then slowly growing bold once he realized how easily trust could be earned and exploited. To most, he appeared brilliant, clever, articulate, charming in a way that seemed effortless. To me, in the beginning, he was a savior, arriving at a time when I was vulnerable, my defenses lowered, my faith in people still intact. He studied that vulnerability with predatory patience, the way one might study a locked chest, knowing there was treasure inside and certain he would find the key. At first it felt like fate. He understood my silences, or so I thought. He asked questions that dug deeper than anyone else dared, and his eyes always seemed to hold the kind of sympathy that makes you believe you've been truly seen. That was his game, making others feel chosen, special, indispensable to him, when in truth he only saw them as pawns in his grand design. It began with small requests, favors dressed as opportunities. He'd suggest a business venture, a connection, a shortcut that seemed harmless enough. He whispered encouragement in one breath and subtle doubts in the next, until my decisions no longer felt entirely my own. Without realizing it, I had begun to orbit him, adjusting my choices to match the path he was quietly laying before me. And just when I started to notice the strain, the inconsistencies in his stories, the cracks in his mask, he tightened his grip by weaving me deeper into his web. The sabotage was quiet at first, a misplaced word that strained a friendship, a manipulated situation at work that made me look unreliable. He thrived in creating confusion, knowing that suspicion would fall on me while he remained untarnished, the picture of support. Each lie was a carefully set trap, each move a calculated strike, until I found myself isolated, doubting even my own instincts. That was his true power, not just to deceive, but to make others question their reality until they became pliable in his hands. But arrogance is the enemy of every cheat. He mistook my silence for blindness, my patience for weakness. What he failed to understand was that even in the moments he thought he was winning, I was watching. I began to trace the patterns he thought were invisible, the inconsistencies in his words, the overlapping lies told to different people, the trail of bitterness left behind by others who had once trusted him. Slowly, I pieced together the image he had worked so hard to hide. When the truth began to surface, it did not come with grand revelations or dramatic confrontations. It came quietly, like cracks forming in glass, spreading until the whole structure gave way. His stories contradicted themselves, his promises failed, and those who once admired him began to see what I had come to know. His allies grew wary, then hostile, peeling away one by one. The world he built on deception began to crumble, and for the first time, the mask slipped from his face. I remember the moment clearly, the shift in his eyes when he realized that he was no longer in control. He had spent so long believing he could bend others to his will that he could not comprehend being outmaneuvered. His rage was silent, festering beneath the surface, but it only made his downfall swifter. In his desperate attempts to claw back what he had lost, he made mistakes, exposing himself further, digging his own grave with every frantic move. And so the man who had tried to dismantle my life dismantled his own instead. His reputation dissolved into whispers of betrayal, his once commanding presence reduced to a cautionary tale told in hushed voices. The people he thought he could control became the architects of his ruin, not out of revenge, but simply because truth, once revealed, has a way of destroying lies more thoroughly than vengeance ever could. I did not need to lift a hand against him. The world he created, the false alliances, the borrowed trust, the endless deceits, turned against him with a precision I could never have engineered. He was a man consumed by his own games, undone by the very weapons he wielded against others. And I, though scarred, remained standing. Wiser, quieter perhaps, but unbroken. His attempt to break my life failed, and in the end, it was his own that was shattered beyond repair. He always believed himself cleverer than the world around him, a man untouchable in his deceit, the kind of cheat who thought lies were as solid as stone. I remember the first time I saw him, his presence was magnetic, the sort that drew people in without effort. He knew how to dress himself in confidence, how to lace his words with just enough sincerity to silence suspicion. If you had asked me then, I would have said he was one of the few I could rely on. That was how well he wore his mask. At first, there was no storm, only a breeze. He listened when others didn't, noticed the details most overlooked. He'd ask about my dreams, my fears, and he remembered them, or at least pretended to, as though they mattered deeply to him. That was his greatest trick, convincing people that they were safe in his company. Once you believed that, you never saw the knife he kept hidden behind his back. His first strikes were so subtle, I almost admired their precision. He would suggest that a colleague had doubts about me, then follow up with reassurance, making himself seem like my only ally. He'd praise me in public, then twist my actions in private so that I appeared careless, unreliable, even selfish. He had an uncanny ability to play both sides of a conversation, whispering one thing to me, another to someone else, always ensuring that he remained at the center while the rest of us stumbled in confusion. It didn't take long for the fractures to appear in my life. Friends I trusted grew distant. At work, whispers followed me like shadows. And he was always there, standing close, shaking his head at the injustice of it all, pretending to shield me while he struck from behind. He wasn't trying to take something small. He wanted everything. My peace, my reputation, my sense of self. Breaking me wasn't a side effect, it was his goal. But arrogance blinds even the most cunning. He thought I was drowning, too disoriented to see clearly, when in fact I had begun to watch him closely. Lies, after all, are like threads. They unravel when tugged from the right end. I started noticing the contradictions. He told one story to me, another to someone else, never realizing how often the details betrayed him. I saw how he lingered in conversations not his own, always listening, always twisting what he heard into ammunition. Piece by piece, the mask slipped, though he didn't realize it. His downfall began quietly. The people he had manipulated started comparing notes. The cracks widened until they became undeniable. His voice, once so convincing, began to sound desperate. His eyes, once steady, flickered with the strain of keeping so many lies intact. The respect he fed on turned sour, and soon his charm, once his greatest weapon, looked like nothing more than arrogance. I will never forget the day it all collapsed. He tried one last scheme, a trap meant to frame me completely, to make me look like the very liar he was. But this time his web was too tangled. Proof emerged, emails, messages, conversations he had thought erased, but which resurfaced at the worst possible moment. The very people he had deceived turned on him, their betrayal fueled not by anger alone, but by the realization of just how thoroughly he had used them. And so he fell, not with drama or fire, but with the silence of someone realizing too late that the game was over. His reputation, the thing he valued most, disintegrated. His allies abandoned him. The name he once wore with pride became a warning spoken in hushed tones. He tried to fight, of course, tried to rebuild, but the world no longer believed him. A cheat without trust is nothing. He had come into my life to break it, to unravel me thread by thread, but in the end it was his own life that lay in ruins. I walked away scarred, yes, but stronger, wiser, and no longer bound by his poison. He was left with nothing but the wreckage of his own lies, a man destroyed not by others, but by the very deceit he thought would make him untouchable.